Which is unfalsifiable. For example, do you remember the Galapagos Islands, right? Now, natural selection says what? It says an organism is going to have many different offspring, and those offspring are going to be selected according to their environment. Now, that's the classical conception of natural selection. Now, say if me and you, James, we go to the island, and we notice the island in the first scenario is filled with birds with small beaks. Using natural selection, we're going to conclude that basically means that natural selection selected for small beaks. We go back to the island and they all have big beaks. And we say natural selection selected for big beaks. The problem is defined this way, and this is according to Karl Popper. I'm sure you've heard of him. Natural selection is unfalsifiable because it fits all explanation. According to him, a theory that explains a contradiction and a confirmation, a theory that explains everything, explains nothing.
Yeah, you're right. But like, there's a kind of good way to do kind of evolutionary biology, and there are some experiments you can do. Sure. So the ideal thing is, rather than kind of looking at the evidence, then kind of creating an explanation.
Ad hoc explanation, yeah.
Yeah, the ideal thing is to try and like make a prediction and then look at what actually is the case. So an example of evolution, a good evolutionary experiment would be saying like, well, according to evolution, like, our behavior should be that we look after children which are our bloods and have our genes better than children which do not have our genes. And they say, yeah, that seems in line with like what a kind of that's like a good evolutionary behavior, and so that should be what we do. And then they kind of go and look at the evidence, and they find that child abuse is 100 times more likely with a step parent than with a biological parent. And so I agree, there's good kind of ways to do evolutionary biology, and then someone can just sort of sit in an armchair and say, and like look at what the evidence is, and then come up with an evolutionary explanation.
So say if I have this theory, right?
Yeah.
My nails grow as the trees grow, right? Yeah. Now, if I go and test that, is it not true that as the trees are growing, my nails grow?
Well, then you'd want to kind of isolate. You'd want to have a control in some respects.
So the problem is, when you define something in a way that it can explain everything, and it can explain a contradiction, which is a clear contradiction, as a confirmation, then it's no longer testable.
Yeah.
And one of the things which David Stove, he's a philosopher of science, he points out in his book Darwinian Fairy Tales, is the Darwinists, they can explain anything, even a hypothetical scenario, as the optimal thing natural selection would have done. So this is why it's very difficult to actually test it.
Naturally is naturally.
It can be difficult to test it sometimes. There are kind of some ways though. Like it sounds
junk DNA.
It sounds like you're like what we've arrived at is that you can sort of use the kind of natural selection explanation when it's convenient, and then call everything else genetic drift, and then you've explained everything.
But don't you think that it's like the history of England, right? Is the history of England something which is, you can make a law about the history of England, or is it a sequence of unique events?
I'm not sure. But probably like you can probably like say some things like, oh well, because it's an island nation, it would have always developed these kind of traits. Like it probably would have always kind of had quite strong shipbuilding. So there are some things that you can like kind of develop a sort of.
But would you say you can make a law about it?
No, you can make you can make a sort of an economist's model, because an economist is often like studying such a complicated system that all they can do is like create a map. Like a map doesn't have detail for every single thing; it just has the major landmarks. So we can make a model which has the major landmarks about kind of a country's development. You can say, oh, a country that is landlocked and like doesn't have, and it has this little water might develop these social
And what are they
traits.
going to use to come up with that?
Huh?
What are they going to use to come up with that?
What do you mean by use? Like,
So,
I guess they'd use their kind of common sense and other evidence, or
UK history is unique, correct?
Yes.
And it only happened once.
yes.
So it's what we would call historically contingent, right? It's not historically necessary, it's historically contingent,
Okay.
meaning it could have happened a different way.
The creation stories happen more than once.
For example,
5 or 6 times.
Okay, but Darwinism is a creation story too. So let me explain it, right? According to evolutionary biologists, if we are right now in 2017 in February and we go back to 4 billion years ago and we rerun the tape of life, we will come to a completely different outcome, according to them. So they believe it's not historical necessity, is a historical contingency, meaning it's very difficult to come up with general laws when you look back retrospectively.
Yeah, if you look
unless
back
what you
over,
do
if
is
you look back over such a long time period, yes. Like if you go back to the very first kind of replicating molecules, yes, so many things could have just happened differently by chance. But over like kind of if you look at a kind of specific kind of environment, like you could say all the animals living in this environment will kind of, for example, adapt traits which help them conserve water, like in the desert. And you can like look at a desert one place in one part of the world and find that they've independently kind of created very similar strategies for surviving in the desert to a desert in another part of the world. So like you can't. So I know it's not that simple. It's not quite that black and white.
I agree it's not that black and white, but isn't it a huge problem that when you already look at a conclusion and you come up with an ad hoc hypothesis, that hypothesis can be explained or replaced by an alternative?
Yeah, that would be a problem. But like you can replace it with an alternative if you kind of go back, rewind all the way to the very start of life.
Well, we don't even have to do that. Like I can look at, for example, there is echolocation in bats and echolocation in dolphins, right?
Yeah.
Both of them, now they both have the same genes for echolocation, but those genes are not due to common descent. Those are homoplacious genes. They just are there, but they don't have common descent. Now, we have this particular scenario. Now, I can look at this scenario and I can try and come up with an ad hoc explanation using the Darwinian worldview. Or I can look at that and go back and try to use evolution by natural genetic engineering. Or I can try to use Lamarckian.
What do you mean by like natural genetic engineering?
Natural genetic engineering is an alternative to Darwinism. And what it basically says is that mutations are not random, but mutations are directed in the sense that they are responses to environmental stimuli, right? So I can use a number of models. I can use evolution by natural genetic engineering. I can use Lamarckian evolution. I can use mutation, Mendelian mutationism, which is known as forgotten synthesis, symbiotic evolution, or evolution by self-organization. I can look at any of them and go back to any of these models and say, you see, it's there. Do you see?
Well,
so this is why you can't say that thing is proving Darwinism. You can't say that. You can say it fits within it, but you also have to admit it fits within all the rest of the models.
Well, some of those models have like fallen by the wayside and been found to be kind of wrong, or they found like kind of evidence for them. So like
Which ones?
So for example, like Lamarckianism, people used to think that if someone like kind of uses their muscle a lot, like is a weightlifter, then their son, because that person over the course of their life lifted weights, that would make their son a better weightlifter. And then people thought, oh, that's wrong because like we found like genetics and like either you pass on a gene or you don't. But then they found out that actually there is a kind of mechanism where Lamarckian can happen, and that's called epigenetics, where you can whether a protein is synthesized or not, and a protein could, for example, cause you to like be good at lifting muscle. So whether that protein is being synthesized from your DNA, so like a gene kind of gives the instructions for a protein, and a protein kind of...
no, that's not epigenetics. Epigenetics... That's the standard Darwinian view, which is DNA equals RNA equals proteins. Epigenetics
is whether like kind of the gene is turned on, off or not, can be passed on to your children.
The simplest way to think of it is this: we have genetic information and we have epigenetic information. Genetic information is inside the nucleus, right? That's your DNA.
Yeah.
Epigenetic information is outside.
No.
Now,
it's also inside. It's whether those genes like have, for example, methylation bound to them.
But remember, genetic information is inside the nucleus. Epigenetics is outside.
No, it's whether that sperm which impregnates the egg also has that methylation bound to that particular region of its DNA inside that sperm.
Okay, I'm getting slightly lost here. What we're speaking about is epigenetics, right?
Yeah.
Epigenetics, and we were speaking about Lamarck being wrong. This is how we got onto this. Evolutionary biologists have used epigenetics to come up with something which is known as neo-Lamarckism, right?
Yeah.
Now, neo-Lamarckism is an alternative to Darwinism, and
they both happen.
well, neo-Lamarckian proponents like Eva Jablenka, like Marion Lamb, these evolutionary biologists, what they've done is they've come up with a complete alternative, and I'll tell you why it's an alternative. They believe in saltational processes, rapid evolution, not gradualism. Because remember, gradualism is the cornerstone of Darwinism and of neo-Darwinism. If you don't have gradualism, the alternative is saltations, and saltations don't fit within natural selection. Saltations fit within epigenetics, they fit within neo-Lamarckism.
You said something, well, like gradualism isn't doesn't have to happen in Darwinism.
It has to, absolutely has to.
Because a Darwin might think that sort of genes change one at a time in order to eventually.
Darwin didn't know about genes, so.
But the it's the up to date kind of.
Okay, neo-Darwinism, right?
Yes, okay.
Now, look. The best proponent of neo-Darwinism today is Richard Dawkins, right? And in his book, The Selfish Gene, he makes it clear you cannot have acquired characteristics which are inherited. So, for example, acquired characteristics, so say you do a lot of weights, right? And the next time you procreate with your partner, your children inherit your acquired trait. According to the selfish gene and according to Darwinism, classic neo-Darwinism, this is impossible. This is what he says in his book, The Selfish Gene.
I very much doubt that Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in epigenetics.
No.
That is an example of epigenetics.
It is an example of epigenetics, but remember...
And he would not kind of disagree with the scientific mainstream consensus because there's good evidence for epigenetics.
Okay, but remember, when he wrote this in the 1980s.
Yes, yeah.
And epigenetics only came around now.
Yeah.
This is why proponents of neo-Lamarckism and epigenetics, they disagree with the selfish gene idea. They say DNA is not RNA, is not proteins, which is a central dogma. They say, for example, Dennis Noble at Oxford, evolutionary biologist there, he says, if you take out DNA and you stick it in a petri dish, it's not going to do anything for 10,000 years. There is something more to the human being than genetics, than the DNA. Selfish Gene says, the Selfish Gene book, Richard Dawkins says, DNA created us, mind and body. But we have done experiments in which we've removed the DNA and there still has been growth due to epigenetic information, meaning the central dogma is wrong, selfish gene is wrong, neo-Darwinism is wrong.
No, there's several different things there. For one thing, the central dogma wasn't invented by Richard Dawkins.
That's Francis Crick.
Yes.
And Richard Dawkins reaffirmed it.
It's about protein synthesis from kind of the genetic information. And the thing is,
and remember, it's a one-way sequence. Remember that it's a one-way sequence.
Yes, but people who kind of believe in epigenetics, which is like geneticists in general, biologists in general, they don't say therefore that the central dogma is incorrect.
They do.
No.
Look, for example, James.
To say that the central dogma is incorrect would be to say that kind of we don't create proteins from our DNA. I mean.
No. Okay. Look, just last month there's a book published called "Dance to the Tune of Life," right, by evolutionary biologist and atheist at Oxford, Dennis Noble. What he basically says is this. He says the central dogma is wrong, and let me explain what I mean by him saying it's wrong. He says it's not a one-way sequence of information. It's not DNA equals RNA equals proteins. We have epigenetic information which affects development. And what he's written, that book and in his previous book, Music of Life, is to challenge the selfish gene. He wants to debate Richard Dawkins because he says he's wrong.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I believe that's, I mean, so I want to make something clear. I'm not like I'm not being a proponent for one particular school of like kind of, I'm a neo-Darwinist, I'm a nihilist. Fair enough.
That's good.
I'm like sort of arguing what I believe is like the biological mainstream, and that what
is the mainstream.
What has been like kind of accepted from like a wide variety of evidence and experiments. And so
even though it's accepted, it doesn't mean it's true, because remember, a scientific consensus is we all believed, all the physicists in the world believed 100 years ago that Newtonian physics was correct. And using Newtonian physics, if you made a prediction and you said this planet is going to be in this location on this day, it would be there. Yet Einstein came along and he showed, even though it worked for 200 years, time and space are flexible, gravity is no longer a pulling force, it's a pushing force, and even the definition of mass changed. So even if all the evolutionary biologists in the world today, they say Darwinian evolution is the most accepted mainstream, it doesn't mean it's true. And it can change in the future.
It could change in the future as we become, as we kind of get access to
new information or new interpretations.
Yes, new. So like
the black swan problem.
Newtonian physics remains like a very good approximation for most things that human beings would do. It's
but not its assumptions. Not its assumptions. It assumes time and space are fixed. And Einstein's famous experiment, in which they had to wait for a solar eclipse, the only reason that experiment was famous and is written all over the world is because it happened to show that time and space are flexible and they bend. So the fundamental assumption of Newtonian worldview was incorrect, even though we went to the moon, and I'm assuming we did go to the moon, based upon that. So we have rockets flying based on Newtonian mechanics, but it was wrong in the absolute sense.
Yes, but like wrong by within the kind of experience that we live in day to day. It's only wrong by it's only wrong by a minuscule amount. It's wrong by so little that it cannot be detected unless you kind of do experiments with light and very fast speeds and very kind of precise measurements.
There's two things. It breaks down when it comes to the quantum level. And this is just the way that science works. General relativity is very powerful. It has loads of predictions which are confirmed. Quantum mechanics has loads of predictions which are confirmed. But both of these are, in terms of their paradigms, in terms of their assumptions, mutually exclusive. They don't work together. So they're trying to come up with quantum gravity, trying to put them together. So whatever science comes up with is not going to be absolute.
I
Scientists can hold two ideas which are incompatible and say they're both working models.
Yeah, that's true. And because what we're trying to like kind of build models that are useful and helpful for us. So I don't see kind of what's harmful about that.
No, there's nothing. And I don't have a problem with accepting Darwinian evolution or neo-Darwinism as a working paradigm. I only take exception when someone says it's true. Because there's a difference between a working model and something being true. They're not the same thing.
I mean, it may be true, but we can't say because of this evidence.
Oh, of course.
True.
Of course,
So.
we're not saying all scientific theories cannot. They're not true. They can never. Science can only give you working models which are falsified, right?
Yes.
Now, science works with theoretical models, but there's an actual reality. We don't disagree there's an actual reality. Now, it could happen that an actual reality corresponds with a theoretical construct. It could be. But how do we know that? We can't use science to arrive at that.
One might disagree that there's an actual reality.
Yeah, we can only kind of...
Well, we're talking in Speaker's Corner today.
Yeah, you're right. We can only kind of get better and better scientific evidence and kind of feel more firm in our kind of probabilistic. We're more and more confident in this.
Well, one of the problems is we can have complete paradigm shifts. What is known as a Gestalt shift. When you have that two faces looking at each other, and when you look at it another way, it's like a vase, right? In science, you get these paradigm shifts. This is something which people like Thomas Kuhn wrote about. That scientists is working within normal science, and boom, you get a new interpretation of the old data, or you get a new piece of evidence which doesn't fit the data, and you do a complete paradigm shift.
But like, I mean, you try and do your best.
Of course. So I'm not knocking science, because look, it's the beauty of science that it changes. It's not a negative thing, is it? Because if we all believed in a geocentric universe, that would be a terrible thing. So it's good that we keep changing our beliefs.
Yeah, you want well, like there's some changes are good and some changes are bad. So like you wouldn't want to change your beliefs to believe. We wouldn't want to start re-believing in a geocentric universe.
No, we wouldn't.
Yeah,
we wouldn't.
So,
of course.
So if
science does falsify.
If science is advancing and like helping us kind of understand things better and kind of manipulate our environment to our advantage better, then that's a good thing. Yes.
Of course it is. And what's very important is to understand the very power of science and the very beauty of it is its previous conclusions can get wiped out, and you can have a new conclusion at any given moment. But when somebody says, and I know you don't say this, but when people say, no, science has now agreed upon this, therefore it's true. That's a very bad thing for science.
Yes, I mean, sometimes like people say it as kind of a shorthand, right?